All right, what I'm gonna do for you is I'm gonna divide this page so that we are in 4 different parts, okay? I'm just gonna use this. Pretend this is me. I went ahead and I drew myself. I transferred it onto the good paper. And now I'm gonna use my media, okay? I'm just using this as practice so that way you guys, can do your work accordingly, all right? Here, I'll use watercolor, okay? Here, I'll use color pencil. Here, I'll use charcoal. And here, I will use oil pastel, okay? Now, let me first start, I'll tell you what, we'll start with watercolor, okay? A few things that you need to know about watercolor, okay? Watercolor is, you need water, okay, in order to work. And this is, you could say, a wet medium, okay? And another thing that you need to know is that it's set up in Roy G. Biv order. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, and then it goes to brown and black. If you run out of these, I have them. If you would like, you're welcome to come by and I'll give you the refills, okay? Now, if we open it up, you could pop them out and they come, you can wash out the whole container and start, okay? This is for those who might have watercolor at home. I think I had 1 or 2 people tell me they had watercolor, so I thought I'd teach you how to use it. Now, there are a few different techniques when you work with watercolor. The one that really you could work with is something called glazes, okay? Glazes are transparent veils of color. And what you do with transparent veils of color is you lightly add them in little at a time. I'm right now starting with an orange shade. I'm gonna do lighter skin tones and I will do darker skin tones so that way everybody can get an idea how to do it. If you're working with a lighter skin tone, I would highly recommend using the orange in a very light way, okay? Lightly adding in a touch of orange into the composition. Now, another thing too, don't get too heavy with it. Okay, a very light value is all you need of orange to work with a lighter skin tone. Now, another thing that's going to happen to you, this paper that I'm working on is not the best of a watercolor paper, okay? This paper is more used for drawing material. So what's happening is as I work with it, it's not quite absorbing it as I need it to, okay? Now, that's working with a glaze, little at a time, building up slowly, slowly, slowly. Like I just did actually this afternoon, I was working on this composition, okay? Now, if I want to, I can go into this, let's say I decide the next day or next hour after it dries, I want to get a little darker. If I add a glaze on top, okay, transparent veil of color, and now I could get subtly darker. Now I'm using the brown. And I'm coming in darker with my skin tone, okay? Like I said, I want to try to show light and dark, okay? Light and dark skin tones so that way you get used to it. Now, I would start off with my brown very lightly. Like you saw it first started with orange. Before I started, it was orange. And now I'm adding in brown tones just to get a little bit darker. Now, if I want to, with the brown, I could go into orange so that way there's that resonance of color that we talked about, the use of the analogous colors. Remember that brown is in the red family. So because brown is in the red family, you can go ahead and use the orange in order to shade and blend it, okay? So right there, I've used the brown and I used the orange in order to create, relatively my skin tone in the watercolor. Now, that's using glazes. Now, let's say I'm working in hair and I want to create, let's say, a dry brush effect. what I would do, and dry brush is what, just like it sounds, the brush is relatively dry. So let's say I've got brown hair. Let's say brown black, okay? And then I want a streaking effect. Hold on, I want to make it so that, there we go. It starts to streak. So let's say in here, I want to create a texture. I would rather maybe you start with one shade, put down like a yellow shade or maybe a light brown shade, and then work into it with what we call the, this is called dry brush. Now, dry brush can be done that way, or it could even be done to make up a different texture in the hair, okay, where it's a more dotted effect. But then again, what would I do? I would put down one color first, let it dry, just like this. Like if I take this now and go on top of it with the dry brush, I would be able to get the texture that I want, or I want it to appear like, okay? So I would go ahead and I'd add in that texture, okay? That texture is called dry brush that I'm creating. It's like I'm doing dots and dashes, or mostly. You'll see a lot of stroke in it. You'll see a lot of texture into it as you work. And I would say go dark in the background, and as you come closer, get lighter, okay? That's what I would recommend. So that, see, the reason why artists work with this particular technique, which was called dry brush, is because they want texture. So that would be one method, one way that you could create, let's say, hair, or let's say any kind of streaking effect that you might need to create hair. Or let's say you're painting grass. Let's say you're painting anything, fur, that involves some kind of texture. Now, another thing with watercolor, you want to make sure you stay translucent or transparent, meaning that you could see through to the white of the paper, okay? Now, again, what did I just do? I did what you call a glaze when we first started. I also did what you call dry brush, okay, where I made up this kind of texture, okay? Now, I'm going to do something called wet and wet. And I'll tell you what, I'll do it here in the face. Now with wet and wet, just like it sounds, it's one wet shade into another wet shade. So here I start with that shade, and then I'll pop a little bit of yellow into the orange, and then there we go. I've got the wet into wet. So basically what happens is that one wet shade went into the other in order to get the shade that I need. Okay, so it's one wet shade working into another wet shade, and I get what we call wet into wet. It's perfect for blending. Whenever you want something to blend, we use wet into wet, okay? Now, again, this is with the darker tones, because I already started with the lighter tones, so you gotta handle a little bit of that, what to do with the lighter tones, okay? But now I'm teaching the darker tones. And all you do is basically go on top of that. Like you saw, I went with the orange first, and then in order to get a darker tone, I added in my brown and my orange a bit more to get darker, okay? And I could even add black depending upon the person. It could go to black, it could go to purple. Shades that normally you work with, especially when you're dealing with skin, is, here, I'll show you right here. With the skin tones, it goes from yellow to orange. It goes from yellow to orange to brown to green to a blue, or even a purple that you could play with while you're working. Now, all right, just finishing up. So we got the wet and wet. We had the glazes, which I demonstrated in the beginning. And then we also did the dry brush, okay? And now I'm going to talk about something called a wash that I could do for the background area. Let's say I need a large area filled, right? So I'll lay down my water first. And what I could do is I take my pigment, and you saw that. It was like, it's almost on fire. It tends to do what it wants to do. It goes where it wants to go right away. That is called a wash, okay? Now, another thing that you could do with wash, and I know this sounds funny, and your mom will probably look at you kind of funny when you go to her asking her for salt or for cellophane for the background. Now, why would we do that? Let me share with you. Okay, this is actually when you add salt into wash of watercolor, okay? It gives you what you call a grainy effect. Hold on a second, I've got late people. I hate when I have late people. Drives me crazy, because then I have to stop. Okay, I wrote down their names and I'll catch up with them later. Right now they're marked absent and here they come. Okay, so in here, I started with a wash and then I threw in salt. Here, I started with a wash and I used cellophane in order to get that texture. Hi, sweetie, how are you?
What is this I'm looking at?
Well, right now I'm talking about the watercolor media, okay? So let me finish. So as I stated, okay, if you're going to go from one shade to another, while it's wet, it's called wet into wet, okay? That helps you when you need to blend, okay? Now, the other kind of technique that we talked about dry brush. And dry brush, like I said, you're probably gonna need it for hair. You're gonna need it, for either straight hair or a hair that might be a little bit curly. You could use it for that, or you could use it for the straighter hair. Now, what you do, and here's another sample of getting that streaking effect, okay, that you might want to work with. Now, as I said, so the wet and wet is one way shade into another. The dry brush is you're using the brush and you're using the pigment, but you're trying to dry out the brush to where it gives you a streaking effect. And then last but not least is using the washes, throwing in salt to give you this grainy look of effect, or a wrinkled effect with cellophane. This could be ideally used in backgrounds. Like let's say you had to cover a large area of space in the background. That would be perfect for that. Now that was with watercolor, okay? Now, I'm gonna put the watercolor aside because we kind of like wrapped up on that. Now I want to talk about a few other mediums, okay? I want to talk about colored pencil, okay? Now, the way in which I'll do it, let me start off like I always do. I'm going to start with the light tone and then I'm going to go to the dark tone, okay? So bear with me. I'm going to start off first with, let's say, orange, okay? Usually I'll start off with lighter skin tones. It's usually orange, or you use a pink, or you even use a red, depending upon who you're drawing, okay? Now, I work with a very light tone. In this case, I'm using, you could say, a blending. Okay, I'm trying to use the side of the pencil. And I'm thinking about what's going back in space, so it's getting dark, things that come out to me getting light. So in this background, I'm pressing down a little bit heavier, and it's almost looking too orange, right? So now here, I'm gonna lighten up my value. And then here, I'm gonna go darker, because remember, things that go back in space get dark, things that come out to you get light. So you go ahead and you play with that logic. You go ahead and add that in accordingly. Now, I'm not gonna keep it just with the orange, okay? Now I'm gonna go ahead and pop in a bit of, actually I could go two ways. I could go to red and then I could go to the brown. I'll tell you what, I'll start with red, hitting that in very softly, but not too much, because then it's gonna be too much. Now I'm gonna hit the brown, okay? And the brown's gonna kind of neutralize it, make it a little duller, not so vibrant in the sense of the orange. Now I'm gonna be getting to a darker skin tone. So let's say if you were light skin, then you wanna stay with the orange. You wanna actually even add in yellow to my lighter skin. Is either yellow, orange, sometimes even green. I know I'm a strange green color. And I know my green shows that it's like a bronze color. It's like a brown green. So what I would do, now I'm gonna get to the darker skin tones, okay? So now I'm gonna start adding in the brown a bit more, darkening up the level here. So see, we went from a light tone, now we're going to a darker tone. So I'm trying to show you with those shades what you can do. Okay, just working with the brown very soft, very softly going in, lights and darks, lights and darks. And that's just using the pencil, okay? Now, in here, you know, you could go in and you could go ahead and work with the, you know, the pupil, the iris, and all that good stuff. Here I just have brown. I don't have my black right now, but that's okay. I could create my black. I can create the illusion of black. I can go ahead and add my shade of blue to give it that illusion. So if I mix those two shades together, it's going to appear from the distance like it's black, okay? And then as I told you, inside the eye, it's not really white, it's like a gray shade. So I'll go ahead and I'll gray it up a bit. Gray is made by light blue and brown, believe it or not. Okay, so if you add those two shades together, it's going to appear like it's gray. You don't have to have gray. Those two shades will make it like it is gray, okay? So I added light blue and a subtle tinge of brown to get that gray tone. Now, I'm not going to stop there. I could even go more, you know, if I want to. But just for the sake of demonstration, I wanted to show some of the skin tone. And I also wanted to show how you could go from that light to dark by using pressure, by using patience, creating that value variation. Very important word is the value variation, okay? Now that's just using those three shades. So this is basically what I just used. I used brown, I used red, I used orange, and I think that was it. And I think I might have used a little bit of blue, okay? And I think light blue and brown for the eyes that were inside the eyes. That's it. So that's just working in that area with color pencil, okay? So we did the watercolor, we did the color pencil. Now what I'll do for you is oil pastel. I don't know if anybody has oil pastel at home or crayons at home. Maybe this is what you might want to use, okay? If it is what you want to use, pay attention, okay? Now, oil pastels are a little bit like they say that they are. They're oily, okay? Now, they come in different grades. Now, like I said, I want to start off with a light skin, and then I want to go to a dark skin, okay? Because you could always go darker, but you can't get lighter, okay? So I'm going to start off with a lighter tone. And again, I'll tell you what, I'll start off with the orange like I normally do. Now, because it's so down, the point is not there anymore. I'm going to have to tear back a bit. And what I'm doing, I'm using the side, okay? And I'm going over it very softly. I'm barely...
Miss Shaker?
Yes. Yes?
You let Gibson in?
Pardon?
Gibson.
Yes, what about? What are you talking about?
Can you let him in?
Oh, God. There's nobody in my waiting room. That's weird.
He said he's in the waiting room.
I don't see him there. There would be a message up on top that says that he's here in my waiting room. There's nothing. Tell him he must be in the wrong room. Yeah, I think he's in Wednesday's room. Everybody went to Wednesday's room. I don't know why.
Okay.
Miss Shaker?
Yes?
In the five things assignment, what do you mean by nothing attached?
Because you didn't put it, it didn't come through. Whatever it was that you sent to me, it didn't come through.
Oh, it didn't come through?
No,
Oh, let me try that again,
All
alright?
right, let's ask questions at the end. Let me finish, okay? So right now, what I did is I used my orange, okay? And I used a peach tone, okay? Very slowly, trying to get color into this. Now, it's getting too red, you could say. So now, I'm gonna pop in a little bit of brown just to kind of neutralize it, okay? Now, I'm not gonna stop there, okay? What I'll do is I'm gonna add some of that peach tone, and I'm gonna add some of the yellow ochre in it so that way it kind of neutralizes it, okay? it kind of brings it in between. It kind of breaks up the medium, you could say. It brings it to a more medium tone when I add that darker shade to it. So now I've added those 3 shades in order to get what I've got, okay? Here, now I need a little bit of darkness. I'm not gonna come down too heavy. I'm just barely touching the paper and I'm adding that in. Okay, now somebody's in my waiting room, so hold on. I just heard them and now they disappeared. Where'd they go? I heard them, I went looking, and now they disappeared. Is that crazy or what? Sorry about that. All right, I'm gonna have to deal with them later. All right, because they're not showing up for some reason. They disappeared. They came on and then they disappeared. All right, so now I'm coming in with my brown, and again, I'm thinking about distance. I'm thinking about what's going back in space, what's coming out to me. So I'll add that in, okay? Thinking about space, thinking about distance, okay? So now I've kind of made that variation as I could, okay, with those 3-4 shades, okay? Now, that's using the oil pastel. And I could go in more. I could add in some white if I want to kind of neutralize it a bit and to make it a little smoother if I want. I could add the white or the beige tone, or, get lighter or darker, depending upon what skin tone I'm doing, okay? I could play back and forth getting what tone I need. White, I would say don't use it till like the end if you need it, okay? Like right now I'm trying to go over the lines that I created so that way they don't show, so I'm popping in the white. And I'm pushing this back, adding in a little bit of the orange just along the edge. And I'll do that again with a little bit of brown, just pushing that edge back, okay? Making it push back in space, pushing back in space. Well, I want to try to keep this just the only area that I do in oil pastel. Trying to keep it basic for you guys. All right, so here I've demonstrated in the oil pastel, showing you using the light to dark of how you create that dimension, okay, that value variation that you guys need, okay? A lot of you ask me, how come I made this grade? I say, oh, did you use value variation? No, value variation is going light to dark and light to dark. I think I've been saying that all semester, okay? Got to get used to using the value variation, creating that value variation, using the analogous colors to help you fade and blend, okay? Use those 3 shades to help you pop whatever it is that you need to create, okay? Any questions on that oil pastel? Okay. The last but not least that I was going to do was charcoal. I'll tell you what, because I went too much into this side already with the oil pastel, I'm going to do charcoal in this area, okay? And it's easy. With charcoal, the one thing that I want to make sure that you know, it's almost the same as using pencil, okay? The only difference is that it's a lot darker, okay? Which means that you need less pressure. Okay, charcoal kind of looks like this. It has a string on the side. If you pull the string softly, it'll allow you to sharpen it, okay? Then you unravel it and now it's sharpened, okay? Now, how do you use it? Pretty much like you would pencil. There's no difference. Here, like for instance, I'll go ahead and I'll start with my dark shade, and I slowly add less pressure, less pressure, less pressure if I want to get lighter. Here, like I told you, you already know I'm a heavy hander. Okay, so I'll start with that dark shade, and then I'll slowly fade it to the light. And I'll do it like so. Now, less pressure, the lighter it will be. Okay, here, darker, and then I'm lightening up as I go across. Okay, so let's say you know, let's say she's wearing, I don't know, a dress and it stops right about there. So I'll stop with my charcoal in that area. Like I said, I want you to use one media. Is it going to be pencil? Is it going to be pen? Is it going to be color pencil? You decide it. Now, the reason why I'm talking all over these medias today is because I had some kids that tell me, I've got watercolor at home, I've got this at home, I've got whatever the case might be. I'm trying to go ahead and cover them so that way you know how to use them. Now, it doesn't stop there. Let's say you're all done with your light to dark. Now you can use something called a tortillon. Tortillon is just a piece of wrapped paper and that made to look like a stick. Now, what you do with that, you allow, this is the only time that I'll allow you to use it, is after you're done. Then you could sit there and really blend it so that it's nice and smooth, okay? Now, that's using, again, charcoal, okay, charcoal. Now, if you were on toned paper, you could use white chalk just along here to make it pop, okay? To make it more volume-esque. Kind of like what I did in these samples, okay? This is actually oil pastel with hatching, oil pastel with cross hatching, and oil pastel with blending, and it's done on black paper. Same too here, okay? These are all on toned paper. This also, toned paper. Here's the blending, using the side of the oil pastel. Here's the cross hatching, and here's the hatching. You don't have to do blending. There's so many different techniques. Why not use them? There's nothing wrong with trying to use the other techniques. Does that make sense? Hello, hello. So we went ahead, we did the watercolor, we did the color pencil, we did the oil pastel, and we did a charcoal area, okay? Now, thought I'd share the last period, okay, too. We did the oil pastel, we did the regular pencil, we did watercolor, we did charcoal, and that's about it. So just remember that when we even talked about the watercolor, remember there's wet and wet that you could use, there's dry brush you can use, there's washes in saran wrap, and there's washes in salt that you could use in order to get what we call visual texture, okay? This is called visual texture. Texture you could see, but you can't feel, okay? In this case, this is visual texture, okay? The salt is dusted off, but the texture remains, okay? Now, any questions? Questions, 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 questions?